Today we'll continue our examination of the threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Specifically, we will review China's growing hostility toward Taiwan, why that should concern the U.S., and how we should respond. I want to thank our witnesses for being here and for their service to our nation. Over the last year, President Xi has sought to intimidate and coerce Taiwan. He has ordered his Navy to surround the island with warships. He has repeatedly launched fighters and bombers across the center line, and he's personally overseen amphibious assault exercises. I'm very concerned these escalatory military exercises are a pretense for an invasion. A couple of years ago, Admiral Davidson testified before our committee that Xi would order an invasion of Taiwan before 2027. Since then, our committee has spoken with several other Pentagon and State Department leaders who have reinforced that timeline. The ranking member and I recently traveled to Taiwan to assess the situation firsthand. We met with President Xi. We discussed the threats they face and the actions her government is taking to improve the defenses. I was impressed with the progress they're making, and I was pleased to hear they are working on a new asymmetric capabilities that are key to deterring China. Much of Taiwan's progress is the result of military training and weapons they received from the United States. Last year's NDA further strengthened our defense partnership. It authorized $1 billion annually in presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan, $2 billion annually in foreign military financing, loans, and $100 million to begin stockpiling U.S. equipment on the island. But more needs to be done. To date, the administration has only announced $345 million in drawdown authority. They have not budgeted, and Congress has not appropriated the funding necessary to fully carry out the authorities provided in last year's NDAA. In foreign military sales, the program we've primarily relied on to provide military aid to Taiwan is clearly broken. Taiwan is waiting on the delivery of over $18 billion in FMS aid. Some of it dates back to 2016, and that's unacceptable. I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses on ways to reform FMS program. For 40 years, our relationship with China and Taiwan has been defined by the policy of strategic ambiguity. To date, the policy has been successful in putting off an invasion. But with rapidly modernizing Chinese military and an increasingly despotic leader, I understand the arguments that we may need to revisit that policy. It doesn't help that President Biden is having trouble articulating a consistent policy toward Taiwan, or what would happen if Xi were to invade. But whatever the policy is today, the use of military force has been and will remain our most effective deterrent against invasion. But for that deterrent to be credible, our military must be fully prepared for this conflict. I'm very concerned that we're not there yet. It was clear from our recent trip that we need to invest much more in long-range fires, distributed logistics, and missile defense. We need to grow our Navy and improve our capabilities in space and cyberspace. We also need to reinforce capabilities of our allies in the region. If a Chinese invasion cannot be deterred, it will be catastrophic for Taiwan and the United States. A successful invasion will cut off vital trade routes and disrupt the supply of critical semiconductors and other technologies. It will sink our economy, endanger our allies, and severely undermine our national security. Finally, everyone should remember that Taiwan is free and democratic. The people of Taiwan have a right to self-determination. They shouldn't have to live under the constant threat of an invasion by a communist autocracy. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on ways we can work together to strengthen Taiwan's defenses and improve our own capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. And with that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any comments he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for having this hearing and also for leading the trip to Asia that we did a couple months ago. It was incredibly informative about this challenge and other challenges in the region. And the policy for the U.S. has always been clear and remains clear. We want to deter an armed conflict in Asia. There are a number of different flashpoints that are challenging in that regard, but none bigger than Taiwan, which is why we've adopted the policy that we've had in place for a number of decades. And I will disagree with the Chairman. I think that policy remains very clear. It is a one-China policy, but crucially, China will not be reunified by force. And the main challenge that we have with this policy right now is that China has been intimating that they will do it by force. So we have a clear policy to deter that. And it is worth noting that we've certainly done a lot more in the last 2 years to deter China in terms of building up Taiwan's defense forces and, crucially, building partnerships throughout the region to deter China than was done in the previous 4 years, without any question. You look at the partnerships that have been built, the number of countries that have spoken up against China reunifying Taiwan by force. We are building a coalition to put that policy in place. Now, the one aspect of the policy, it's interesting to call a policy of strategic ambiguity unclear. That's kind of the point. We don't wish to explicitly say that, we're going to go to war with China over Taiwan. That sort of violates the one China policy. What we carved out in that policy and what we maintain is the right to make Taiwan strong enough to deter forcibly being reunified. That is the purpose of strategic ambiguity. I think it is really important. I think it's also important to recognize that one of the biggest motivators that would push China to act by force is any sort of movement towards clear, unambiguous Taiwanese independence. I think everybody, right, left, center, all over the spectrum, recognizes that is the red line of all red lines for China. So we have to move forward with the policy we have, arming Taiwan, building partnerships to deter, while not taking that overly aggressive stance and frankly, removing that ambiguity. That is what is incredibly dangerous going forward. So we need to maintain that policy. I believe the administration has clearly articulated that, and more importantly, articulation notwithstanding, they've built the partnerships and alliances specifically in Taiwan and the efforts to work with the Taiwanese government to make sure that they are strong enough to deter that invasion, that they have support from their allies and partners throughout the region. Now, there are a number of questions, I think the chairman raised some of them, that are really important. Number one is the capability question. And I'll close here, and we've certainly seen that in Ukraine. We've done an amazing job of pulling together a partnership and arming Ukraine and putting them in a position to be as successful as they've been when combined with their unbelievable courage and willingness to fight. But we need to maintain those supplies. We need to maintain those supplies of weapons. And I think that's what most of us worry the most about. Are we going to be able to have those capabilities, whether it's flaws in the foreign military sales or foreign military financing programs, or whether it's the simple production capacity? We're most curious how we meet that. Just closing this point on a positive note, but the partnerships that we've built, it's not just going to be the United States of America that provides these munitions. We have built partnerships across Europe, across Asia, across the world. 53 nations are contributing to the defense of Ukraine. A similar number of nations, or somewhere in the neighborhood at least, are working with us on the Taiwan issue. So the strength in numbers is really coming to bear. But I do look forward to hearing more about how we can meet those production challenges to be in a position to deter China in Asia. And I guess, one final point, it's not just Taiwan. China claims the sovereign territory of at least a half dozen other countries. If they are able to, by force, retake Taiwan, they have their eyes on a number of other places. There's territory in Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, India. I think someone told me even Russia, that China claims that should be part of theirs. If they can bully their way into Taiwan, it is not the last place that they're going to try to bully their way into, which is why it is so important that we have an adequate deterrence. With that, I look forward to the testimony, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for those very thoughtful points. I'd now like to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Eli Ratner, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs. Ms. Myra Resnick is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Regional Security, and Major General Joseph McGee is the Vice Director of Strategy, Plans, and Policy for the Joint Staff. I welcome all of our witnesses. Thank you for taking the time to be here and for your time in preparation for this hearing. It's very important to us. We will start with Dr. Ratner. The floor is yours.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss how the Department of Defense is strengthening deterrence across the Taiwan Strait. At the outset of today's hearing, let me be absolutely clear. The Department remains committed to the well-established One China policy of the United States, guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 communiques, and the 6 assurances. It is this longstanding policy that has helped to preserve peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait for more than 4 decades, and it is why this administration opposes any unilateral changes to the status quo. At the same time, we are clear-eyed that the PRC is waging a campaign of military, diplomatic, and economic pressure against Taiwan. China's leaders have yet to renounce the use of military force, while they increasingly turn to the PLA as an instrument of coercion in support of their revisionist aims, conducting more dangerous activities in and around the Taiwan Strait. It is in part for these reasons that the Department's 2022 National Defense Strategy identified the PRC as our top pacing challenge, and it is also why we are laser-focused on meeting our commitments consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, providing Taiwan with self-defense capabilities, as well as maintaining our own capacity to resist any use of force that jeopardizes the security of the people on Taiwan. Mr. Chairman, as Secretary Austin has previously warned, and as you did just now, and I'm quoting directly here, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would be devastating. Taiwan is a thriving democracy that plays a vital role in the world economy, with high technology exports like semiconductors. The strait itself is an international waterway where high seas freedoms of navigation and overflight are guaranteed under international law and absolutely essential for global commerce and prosperity. Military aggression across the strait, whether in the form of an outright invasion, a blockade, or other means, would risk human life and global prosperity unimaginable in this century. As I told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2021, Taiwan is located at a critical node within the first island chain in the Indo-Pacific, and its security is critical to the region's security. This is why we have seen a growing number of states in the Indo-Pacific and throughout the international community raise their voices about why peace and stability in and around the Taiwan Strait matters so much to them. Maintaining peace, stability, and deterrence across the Taiwan Strait is not just a U.S. interest or an interest of the people on Taiwan. It is clearly a matter of international concern. By attempting to change the status quo, the PRC would put at risk the peace that has brought historic prosperity to the Indo-Pacific and the world for decades. Importantly, we do not believe that conflict is imminent or inevitable, because deterrence across the strait today is real and strong, and we are doing more than ever to keep it that way. Our budget request shows that the Department is focused on delivering cutting-edge capabilities for our military right now, while investing in the capabilities we need to maintain deterrence well into the future. We are also making historic advances in our alliances and partnerships, further reinforcing one of America's greatest strategic advantages, and the facts speak for themselves. Over the past year, we have announced transformative achievements with Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, among others, that will make our force posture across the Indo-Pacific increasingly distributed, mobile, resilient, and lethal. Meanwhile, we are drawing upon all available tools to meet our commitments to provide for Taiwan's self-defense. Partnering with the State Department, we're accelerating FMS cases and cutting red tape. We have also put to good use the authorities Congress has provided us, including by employing both presidential drawdown authority and foreign military financing for Taiwan for the first time ever this year. Looking ahead, we know that funding to support these authorities would advance our bipartisan whole-of-government commitment to strengthening Taiwan's self-defense. Mr. Chairman, we are confident that our approach is yielding results. I'll conclude here by underscoring that the continued maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait will require heightened urgency, attention, and resources in the critical years ahead. The Department is seeking the partnership of this committee and the entire Congress to keep delivering. The American people, the people on Taiwan, and people across the rest of the Indo-Pacific region and around the world deserve nothing less than the peace, stability, and deterrence we seek to strengthen. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ratner. Ms. Resnick, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on U.S. security cooperation with Taiwan and for your strong bipartisan efforts to maintain peace and security in the Taiwan Strait. I'm grateful for the opportunity to appear here alongside Dr. Ratner and Major General McGee. Before discussing the various ways we have built up security cooperation with Taiwan, let me start by addressing why Taiwan matters. Geographically, Taiwan's shipping lanes are the arteries of global commerce, with half of the world's trade going through the Taiwan Strait every year. Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, any disruption would be acutely felt around the world.
Ms. Resnick, would you pull the microphone a little bit closer, please?
Sure. Let me know if that works.
There you go.
Any disruption would be acutely felt around the world, threatening more than 180,000 American jobs and snarling critical supply chains from Alabama to Washington and beyond. Economically, Taiwan's cutting-edge semiconductors are the beating heart of the world's economy, and they are used in everything from vehicles to iPhones to computers to pacemakers. These advanced chips are also necessary for American defense, our next-generation fighter jets, satellite, radars, and missile defenses. Moreover, Taiwan is a leading democracy. Taiwan's movement from autocracy to a vibrant democratic society is an inspiration for us all. One of the keys to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is credible deterrence. Consistent with our longstanding policy, we are laser-focused on strengthening our cooperation to bolster Taiwan's defense and deterrence capabilities in the months and years ahead. And while our policy toward the PRC has not changed, PRC pressure against Taiwan has increased, and therefore, Taiwan's capabilities must also increase to match the threat. Our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within the broader region. As Dr. Ratner mentioned, the National Defense Strategy identifies the PRC as our pacing challenge, and our cooperation with Taiwan to support its asymmetric defense strategy is front and center for deterring PRC aggression. Thanks to the steadfast and bipartisan support of Congress, we have made significant progress strengthening our security cooperation with Taiwan. We are expediting arms sales to Taiwan to the greatest extent possible, in line with our longstanding policy of maintaining peace and stability across the Strait. We are prioritizing Taiwan's defense capabilities with unprecedented speed and urgency. Last year, we authorized the highest single-year number of foreign military sales notifications to Taiwan in at least 30 years. In this administration, we have authorized almost $6 billion in Taiwan arms sales. With thanks to Congress for the new presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan, the Secretary of State recently directed the transfer of defense articles from DoD stocks to Taiwan. We also recently notified Congress of our first ever provision of foreign military financing to Taiwan. This funding will prioritize capabilities that Taiwan needs now, while supplementing Taiwan's own defense budget, which has nearly doubled in the past 7 years. In addition, for the first time, we have identified and notified Congress that Taiwan is eligible to receive excess defense articles as grant assistance, not only for purchase. This provides another mechanism to support Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. And the administration is taking a hard look at the global foreign military sales system to make it as lean and efficient as possible, learning the lessons from Ukraine about the changes that we have made in order to speed transfers to Taiwan and to other global partners. While we have taken several steps forward, we have more work to do. We need to expand America's industrial capacity, invest in our partnership through additional security assistance and authorities, and make it clear to the world that we will stand on the side of democracy and a free, open, resilient, and secure international order. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Resnick. General McGee, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, committee members, good morning. I appreciate this opportunity to update you on how our joint force supports the Department of Defense efforts to strengthen deterrence across the Taiwan Strait by delivering a forward-leaning, cutting-edge military, integrating with regional allies and partners, and supporting our commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act. Our national defense strategy identifies the People's Republic of China as our pacing challenge, the only competitor capable of integrating all the elements of its national power to meet a sustained challenge to the rule-based international order. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a significant increase in the PLA's maritime and air activity as the PRC continues its pressure campaign against Taiwan and strives to increase its regional influence. Cross-strait peace and stability remains a fundamental U.S. national security interest in the Indo-Pacific, so the PRC's actions are destabilizing and increase the likelihood of miscalculation. However, conflict is neither imminent nor inevitable. U.S. deterrence, backed by the most capable and credible fighting force in the world, is real and strong today. Our forward-based joint forces demonstrate resolve, support allies and partners, and provide senior leaders with options during a contingency. However, fielding combat-ready forces throughout the Indo-Pacific requires access, basing, and overflight arrangements. The Department is supporting U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's pursuit of permanent and rotational operating locations throughout the region to increase survivability in a contested environment, reduce risk, and sustain the joint force with distributed logistics. The funding provided by Congress in 2023 and the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request will enable the joint force to continue necessary planning and implementation of these efforts. Next, our network of allies and partners is the joint force's greatest asymmetric advantage. These alliances, multilateral arrangements, partnerships, and friendships are essential elements of this network and critical for providing regional security. Accordingly, the Joint Force fully supports the Department's efforts to grow the coalition of partners dedicated to preserving peace and stability throughout the Indo-Pacific region. We will continue to strengthen security cooperation, training, and campaigning with partners by building capacity, increasing interoperability, and enhancing shared security based on mutual values, trust, and respect. Lastly, the Joint Force supports the Department as it continues to uphold commitments consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, including providing Taiwan with self-defense capabilities commensurate with the PRC threat. The TRA has enabled peace, stability, and deterrence across the strait for over 4 decades. It also provides the foundation of bipartisan support for providing Taiwan with self-defense capabilities and maintaining the Joint Forces' capacity to confront anything that jeopardizes Taiwan's security. The capabilities we provide are tailored to counter the military threat Taiwan faces, and we believe they provide the best return on investment and deterrent value. Thank you for what this committee and this Congress have done and continue to do to provide oversight and resources to counter the PRC's increasingly coercive and aggressive behavior. I look forward to your questions and today's discussion.
Thank all of our witnesses. I recognize myself now for questions. Dr. Ratner, you heard Ms. Resnick describe why Taiwan is important. Generally, why would you say Taiwan is important specifically to the U.S. national security?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thought your opening statement did a terrific job of articulating that as well as Das Resnick, and it's an important message. I would start that the national security of the United States matters in terms of Taiwan's role in the global economy. It is critical in terms of its own integration with the United States and with the global economy, and what we have heard is that conflict or crises or even disruptions of economic activity in and around Taiwan would be devastating from a broader, for the United States, for the people on Taiwan, but also for people around the world. And I think that's a really important message that we need to be really clear about. In terms of broader U.S. national security interests, the national security strategy has described the PRC as the only country with the will and capability to refashion the world according to its authoritarian preferences. That's why the department has described the PRC as the department's top pacing challenge, and a hostile invasion of Taiwan, not only the devastation it would reap, but what it would mean for the region would be a big step forward in terms of Beijing's efforts to try to advance that vision. That would have real implications for our own military, our alliances, and the future of international politics.
Okay. Ms. Resnick, is there anything specifically what should Congress do, if anything, that would deal with this FMS backlog that we've talked a lot about?
Thanks for your question, Congressman, and also the opportunity to clarify about what a backlog actually means. The $19 billion that you referenced is actually cases that have been approved by Congress, approved by the State Department, and have either gone through contracting, which can take a long time, or are waiting for industrial production. I would refer you to a chart that I included in my written testimony on page 7, which goes through all of the stakeholders that are involved in how a capability requirement becomes a weapon delivered. And there are complicated processes, no joke. However, what we have done at the State Department is look at the various efficiencies, the lessons learned from how we were able to speed transfers to Ukraine. What are those lessons learned? How can we apply them globally, including to Taiwan? We call it FMS 2023, and there are a number of recommendations, 10 recommendations that we have put forward. I'll go over a couple of them today. The first one is focusing on exportability as part of the design phase. So it is of no use to our partners if the U.S. military is using equipment that our partners need, but that is not exportable to our partners. We need to be able to build exportability into the design phase so that we're not going back and re-engineering at cost for our partners. If we are truly to be elevating our alliances and our partnerships, we need to be able to do that with respect to our partners' procurement. I would also highlight this committee's important support for multi-year procurement to allow our industry some predictability when it comes to orders. And then lastly, an expanded commitment and expanded flexibility for foreign military financing. Our FMF budget is 90% earmarked, which means we have almost no flexibility to respond in a contingency scenario. We need more flexibility within the FMF budget to be able to provide important investments for Taiwan and for other partners that need it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, you mentioned this in your opening statement, but can you speak a little bit more about the importance of strategic ambiguity and the fine line between making sure that we protect Taiwan while not pushing towards independence because of the impacts that would have on President Xi and China's reaction?
Yes, absolutely, Ranking Member Smith. Thank you for that question. As I said, the administration is committed to our longstanding policy. Strategic ambiguity is part of that and has been part of our ability to maintain deterrence across the Taiwan Strait for decades. We believe that sustaining that policy is critically important. It allows us, under the Taiwan Relations Act, to fulfill the commitment we have to support Taiwan's self-defense, while also maintaining our policy of not supporting Taiwan independence and not supporting unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. So we think that's a really important element, and that changing that policy could drive Beijing to initiate military action even when it was not ready to do so.
Because there's some very realistic nationalistic pressures in China. Granted, President Xi is driving this, but it would be a mistake to think that it's just him. Is that fair? The Chinese people, if it were to be perceived that we were pushing Taiwan towards independence or some sort of formal defense agreement, there would be enormous pressure in China. It wouldn't just come from President Xi. I mean, am I right about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's why it's important to maintain this policy. It's what gives us the best shot at peace, and that's what we're trying to achieve here, is to not have a war in Asia. And we can do that by maintaining a very sensible policy, which is reunification. Sure, we're going to leave the specifics behind. And actually, Taiwan and China have been working very closely together, had been working very closely together, from about 2000 until about 2015, and it was working just fine. There's no reason for China to feel the need to forcibly reunify Taiwan. We need to make sure they're reminded of that. Ms. Resnick, on partnerships, really important that it's not just the U.S. and Taiwan, that it is a global response, in part because it impacts President Xi's calculation for what costs there would be if he tried to do a military reunification with Taiwan. So talk to us a little bit more about what partnerships we're building, how the rest of the world is responding, and specifically the efforts the U.S. is making to strengthen those partnerships to protect Taiwan.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for that question. What we have found is that Taiwan is able to offer to partners around the globe significant and sustainable benefits to the citizens of those countries. We work to grow those partnerships. We work to make sure that Taiwan is included in a number of engagements. In the context of the global cooperation and training framework, we work with Taiwan and many other partners to offer workshops when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to HADR, to be able to show how Taiwan can be value added to those relationships. I'm happy to discuss in another environment some of the specific partnerships that we work on. But suffice it to say that one of our lessons learned from Ukraine is the importance of allies and partnerships, and building those allies and partnerships for reliance when it comes to scenarios, when it comes to like a worst case scenario.
Understood. Yeah, the world has a very powerful interest in making sure that China does not invade Taiwan. The global economic disruptions would be enormous. So yeah, I think it's really smart of the administration to be using that and working on building partnerships. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very important hearing. It's so in partisan support, Republicans and Democrats, for the people of Taiwan. With that in mind, and I appreciate the witnesses here too, but my appreciation and gratitude for the independence of Taiwan is personal. My father served in the Flying Tigers, the 14th Air Force, in India and China during World War II. He served in Kunming, Chengdu, Xi'an, and he raised me to have a great affection for the people of China. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit in Beijing with President Jiang Zemin at the presidential compound. When I was introduced as a member of Congress, it didn't really hurt my feelings, but he yawned. And then somebody said, "Hey, Joe's the son of a flying tiger." And so he put his arms up in the air and announced, "The American military is revered in China." At that time, there was such reverence for what America had done to liberate the country during World War II. But sadly, in the last 20 years, the Chinese Communist Party has murderously oppressed the people of China, and increasingly the Chinese Communist Party threatens its neighbors with a map that was released by the government in Beijing in the last 2 weeks, which indicates that they have territorial claims threatening India, Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan, Philippines, and amazingly, Russia. And so the aggression that could occur, we need to make every effort, I believe, to stop. And with that in mind, Ms. Resnick, for all of the arms sales to Taiwan approved by the Department of State during the Biden administration, it seems that everything continues to be delayed. We must expedite the security of Taiwan to prevent the CCP aggression against the people of Taiwan. We must learn from the lessons of war criminal Putin's murderous invasion of Ukraine and ensure that Taiwan is prepared against CCP aggression. Taiwan should be, I believe, a prickly pear to achieve peace through strength. With that in mind, what are the greatest challenges and delays associated with delivering arms to Taiwan, and what are you doing to address these delays? What is the average length of time until systems to Taiwan are under contract?
Thanks so much, Congressman, for your question. To the greatest extent possible, we expedite arms sales to Taiwan through the State Department. 95% globally of arms sales go through the State Department in 48 hours, and that includes our foreign policy review. So that is 48 hours. For that 5%. Where there might be stickier issues, we have embarked on this FMS 2023, which is our 10-point plan, our 10 recommendations on how we can find efficiencies within our system. But I will say that the cases that you are referencing have already gone through the State Department. They've already gone through congressional review. These are cases that are waiting on industry for production. And by and large, the long pole in the tent is industrial production. That means that we need to work with industry to find efficiencies in their processes, work with industry to make sure that they are opening production lines here and abroad on co-production to make sure that, that we're able to deliver on time. The delays that we have seen in contracting are of concern. I would defer to Pentagon colleagues on how their Tiger team has addressed contracting delays, but certainly we will need to improve contracting times to be able to address any delays in the process.
Well, hey, that's an extraordinarily pleasant surprise to me, 48-hour approval. And hey, that's in the interest of the American people. And so I hope you reach the other 5% too, okay? So let's, whatever can be done. And then, Mr. Ratner, indeed, there were Harpoon anti-cruise missiles to be delivered to Taiwan to protect the people of Taiwan. What's the status of the delivery?
With the authority of the Secretary of State under the Arms Export Control Act, I can certainly take that question. The Harpoons are expected to be delivered in the coming years. We have worked with industry to be able to expedite that. They are next in the production line. It is very difficult to change the production queues because of the bespoke.
Okay, hey, my time is up, but hey, any way it can be expedited. And
We are with you on that.
Hey, any that we have an inventory should be delivered. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, for holding this hearing, which again I think has put some real clarity into an issue where, again, there's a lot of concern but also a little confusion. And thank you to all the witnesses for your hard work. General, President Xi Jinping has made it pretty clear publicly that he's been calling on his military to be capable and ready for an invasion by 2027. I just wonder if you could just sort of talk a little bit about I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who sort of look at China as 10 feet tall and a military that is, you know, totally capable of overwhelming force and doing whatever it wants. But there is a logistical challenge in terms of the Straits of Taiwan, in terms of the 120 or to 100 to 120 mile width, and also just the complexity of an amphibious joint invasion. And what, if you could just talk about that a little bit in terms of what your assessment is, particularly with a sort of 2027 sort of date that certainly is out there.
Sir, thank you for the question. I think it is important to highlight the difficulties from a military and how difficult this invasion would be if the Chinese made the decision to take such a course of action. Obviously, we believe and hope that deterrence is going to continue to stop them. But if they were first up, they'd have to cross the Taiwan Straits, which is between 90 and 120 miles. By way of comparison, for the D-Day invasion, that was about 25 miles. They would have to mass tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of troops on the eastern coast, and that would be a clear signal this is beginning. They would have to do a combined amphibious and airborne air assault operation, we believe, which is an incredibly complicated joint operation to be able to do, especially when you're talking about those distances, that would leave them in the middle of that gap, you know, 90 to 100 miles, susceptible to all the fires that could be brought upon an invading force that was already telegraphing their intentions. They would be charging into a country which has a credible and strong military force about the size of Taiwan. They'd be hitting cities like Taipei with about 7 million people. That's twice the size of Los Angeles. They would also encounter an island that has very few beaches where you could land craft on, mountainous terrain, and a population that we believe that would be willing to fight. So there is absolutely nothing easy about a PLA invasion of Taiwan.
Great, thank you. I think that's helpful for a lot of folks who maybe haven't pulled out their maps. But I think everything you said is what we saw on Mr. Rogers' Codell back in June. Mr. Ratner, while we were there, there was also a lot of discussion with the Taiwan leadership about the fact that China had, again, just come out of their COVID lockdown. All the predictions in Wall Street that they were going to come roaring back in terms of their economy. Clearly now it's pretty clear that China has a lot of structural problems with its economy in terms of massive debt, a property and real estate market that is overextended and collapsing, 20% unemployment for young Chinese. How do you sort of look at that, which is a relatively recent phenomenon, in terms of whether or not that adds risk in terms of a decision to invade or for domestic political pressures, or whether or not a rational response would be to tamp down enterprises like an invasion because they've got work to do at home?
Representative Courtney, that's a really important question. In part, the answer to that is unknowable. And because of that, what I will say is we are watching the PRC economy very closely. We are seeing some of the trends you are describing. We are also watching some of the issues that PLA is having in terms of how it's managing a different resource condition than maybe they had expected when they were growing at higher rates, and seeing them making trade-offs that maybe they weren't expecting to have to make, as well as some of the institutional challenges that they have as it relates to corruption and otherwise. And of course, there's a broader range of internal domestic issues associated with demographics, the real estate market, political instability, any number of issues that you've just raised that China's leaders have to contend with. For our part, we have identified the PRC as the department's top pacing challenge, and we're going to continue investing in our own strength and capability such that, to the earlier part of your question, when Xi Jinping wakes up every day and looks out the window and considers whether or not it's within his cost-benefit analysis to initiate an invasion against Taiwan, that he says today's not the day. I think we're pretty confident that's true today, and we're doing everything we can to keep it that way.
Thank you, and yield back.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us. Ms. Resnick, I wanted to focus on the Department of State's FMS 2023 initiative. And essentially, you're saying you're going to prioritize and help in planning assistance in the future. That's great in the future, but we know the future is now for Taiwan. Taiwan's pretty focused on getting things done. I had an opportunity to meet with President Tsai with the CODEL that I led there, and she is adamant about making sure that these foreign military sales backlogs are filled. As you heard the chairman, it's substantial. Not only F-16s, but F-16 parts. As you know, having to scramble those jets every time the Chinese fly into that air defense identification zone wears those jets out. They need those parts for 141 aircraft. They need the 66 new aircraft. Prioritization in the future doesn't address today's constraints. The U.S. has plans to provide 66 aircraft, and that's great, but those plans have been started in 2019. Here we are today. The department says that, don't worry, final delivery date is going to be 2026. That's 7 years. 7 years, knowing that China has ramped up their efforts in threatening not just Taiwan, but threatening the region. And we talk about partnerships. We talk about, oh, we're going to have all these friends in the region that are going to help us out. It doesn't appear they were being very friendly with the policies that we have and not helping and prioritizing these foreign military sales. Congress has authorized the president $1 billion of drawdown authority. Okay, that's now, but it hasn't been used in the past. Can you tell me why hasn't this been a priority up until now, when all of a sudden the lights are shining on this? Everybody's looking at this and go, my gosh, we need to do this. Why haven't we gotten further along with this? I agree with President Tsai. They are in dire need of parts and aircraft if they have any hope of deterring the Chinese. Deterrence of the Chinese is a joint effort. It cannot just be the United States. And Taiwan rightfully looks at us and goes, you know what, you made a lot of promises, folks, but you haven't delivered on the promises. Assure me that we're going to deliver on those promises in a timely manner, and it's not going to take another 7 years to deliver what they first asked for in 2019.
Congressman, thank you for the question. And of course, again, the opportunity to clarify. When the State Department approves and when Congress approves of a weapons sale, that is the beginning of the process for contracting. It then goes to
I understand about process. Tell me about outcomes. Tell me about outcomes.
Sure.
I don't care about the process. Tell me about outcomes.
After contracting, it then goes to industry. So we are waiting on industry. Industry, we have been working with industry to step up their production. This has been a particular effort at the Pentagon for Deputy Secretary Kath Hicks, who has worked tirelessly to be able to shorten those production timelines. But you are absolutely right that we need to use other tools. Let me talk about two of them. The first is foreign military financing, because knowing that if we need to get something on contract in order for production to start, we have been using foreign military financing for the first time in this administration. If if Taiwan is unable to, because of their fiscal year, to get something on contract, then we can supplement Taiwan's defense budget, which, as I said in my opening, has doubled in the last 7 years. So they have skin in the game here. But we are able to supplement Taiwan's defense budget by getting something on contract immediately, and also so that they don't miss the military acquisition window. There's a second, which is, as you mentioned, the Presidential Drawdown Authority. For the first time, we use this authority because for the first time, Congress authorized that authority. We thank you for that. We think that this is a very effective tool. This is a permanent authority, so we will continue to use this. We do not expect that we will need to have to come back to you over and over again for a new authority here. So thank you for that authority, and we will continue to use it.
As my time is running out, what pressures have you put on industry with the urgency that is behind needing these aircraft to help Taiwan protect itself? What have you done to make sure that industry delivers?
So we understand that what industry is looking for is predictability to make sure that if they are going to open new production lines, or if they are going to run the production lines on overtime. So we have worked very closely with Lockheed. I understand that the Air Force and Lockheed are working together on this in order to address some of the issues with the F-16. So we do work with industry, and we continue to do that.
Thank you. Working needs to equal delivery. I hope to see delivery of those aircraft here in the months to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and for calling this hearing today. Defense cooperation, and it's an incredibly important hearing. And hearing from my colleague, Mr. Whitman, he brings up great points about the deterrence. Three primary ones being military, there's political, and then there's certainly economic. And when we talk about predictability, I think that is so important, because as China looks to the world and making that calculation that you speak about each day, waking up is today the day to go after Taiwan, they look at the U.S. and what are we thinking? What are we doing? And when we look at the focus of this committee has been so much and so intent in making sure the military and that we're getting them the right equipment at the right time. But it's also what we're doing. So my question is, when we look at what's going on in Ukraine, and now they're seeing a potential, called a pause, a pivot, the lack of predictability on what we're going to do in helping Ukraine in funding, whether we're going to extend and increase the amount of funding go there, it's not going to take a genius for China to look at and say, wow, are they in on Ukraine? What will they do when it comes to Taiwan? That's a very big issue that they're going on. So are we going to be there? We're potentially getting ready to see what happens if we shut down government. What does that do to our readiness for our ability to deliver the F-16s? So from a political standpoint, and I'd like to get some focus on this, Dr. Ratner, where is the assessment when we talk about lack of funding going on for Ukraine or potential shutdown? How does this fit into that calculus of what China looks at when they look at the resolve of the U.S.?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think the question that I would ask is, what can the administration do in partnership with Congress to strengthen deterrence across the Taiwan Strait to address exactly the issues that you described? And I think there are three particular actions, building upon what Das Resnick said, that should be top priorities to build confidence in the region and assurance in Xi Jinping's mind of U.S. deterrence. First is we do need to see a full year on-time appropriation. The National Defense Strategy is singularly focused on the PRC, and the budget reflects that strategy, and we need that budget passed in full to be able to implement the strategy. And of course, continuing resolution or a shutdown would inhibit our ability to do that. Second, as Das Resnick has emphasized, we really do need to work together to strengthen the U.S. defense industrial base so that we are better positioned as the United States to strengthen our own readiness and to support key allies and partners, and we can do that through expanding and leveraging multi-year procurement among other tools. And then finally, Congress can provide appropriations against the new authorities that this committee has provided to the administration and that Congress has provided so that we can leverage presidential drawdown authority and foreign military financing to their full effect. Because to date, we have those authorities, but they have not been appropriated against. I think doing all of those three things would send a really powerful message to Beijing.
Well, thank you. I want to just switch over when we start looking at tipping points or tripwires. And from a military standpoint, the modernization that we are hearing about, is there a tripwire when that you can see, General, that there's certain equipment or cooperation that takes place that might push China to making a hasty decision?
Sir, our focus in terms of support to Taiwan has been to increase their defenses. So the weapons that we're providing them are simply for the defense of their country. I can't tell you if there is a single asset or a type of weapon that would set them over in terms of a tipping point. But I think it's important to emphasize that the aid that is provided to Taiwan is purely of a defensive means.
Good point. So let me switch over to the last one, and that is the political. Where might that tripwire be, whether it's by Taiwan or the U.S., that would put us in a collision course? Is there an election? Is there a statement that we believe that tripwire is going to be?
One way that we see that we can deter the PRC is by demonstrating resolve for our support to Ukraine. And don't trust me, senior Taiwan officials have said that Ukraine's success against Russia will help deter aggression from China.
I'm sorry, my time has expired. I yield back. My apologies.
The gentleman chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon, for 5 minutes.
Thanks to all three of you. I appreciate the level of preparation and the seriousness you're taking this. I'm grateful to you. First, I just want to say that Taiwan has 23 million people. They've embraced democracy, human rights, free markets, our freedom of speech, religion, and the press. And we have a moral and a strategic obligation to help Taiwan deter an invasion, and if deterrence fails, to help Taiwan defeat an invasion by Communist China. So this deterrence of Taiwan should be one of our highest priorities, and I can tell that you share that view. My first question is for either Dr. Ratner or Ms. Resnick. Our focus in our country is, in recent months, or over the last year or so, has been on Ukraine. If Congress fails to help Ukraine and Russia prevails, what is the message that China will take from this, or even what will be the message that Taiwan takes from this? I'll ask Dr. Ratner first.
I may allow, I'll say a word on that, but Ms. Resnick is maybe in the middle of a response to that question with the last member, so maybe if you want to finish your answer.
Sure. We see that our support for Ukraine bolsters Ukraine's deterrence, but also bolsters Taiwan's deterrence. That where we can, we should be making sure that the PRC gets the right message from us, which is that we support our partners, we support our allies, and that we are a reliable partner. Sending that message of reliability is exactly what we need to be doing right now. Decreasing our support for Ukraine would send exactly the wrong message to the PRC.
It sends a message if we don't do this, that we don't stand up to the values we believe in, and that we won't stand up against a bully. And I think we need to. General McGee, one of the options I don't hear much about is a blockade. We talk about invasion, but I think a blockade's another serious option the Chinese could be looking at. How are the Taiwanese preparing for this? How are we helping? And they don't have a depth of food or energy, so this could be a serious issue.
Taiwan takes a responsibility to keep their nation provisioned with enough food to be able to survive a blockade of a fairly significant amount of time. Maybe not appropriate to discuss exact numbers here, but I know that Taiwan takes that seriously. I know they take the threat of a blockade as a possibility. I think it is an option, but probably not a highly likely option. When you start looking at the military options, much easier to talk about a blockade than actually do a blockade, I think, when you're actually conducting military operations. I know Dr. Ratner's looked at this quite a bit as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would only just add that a blockade would be devastating to the international economy and would likely induce the kind of broad-based, wide, deep response from the international community against China's actions that Beijing would likely be trying to avoid in this circumstance to coerce Taiwan. So it would likely build an international coalition against Taiwan. In addition, we believe, based on our analysis, that Taiwan would have options on its own and with the international community to ensure the delivery of industrial resources, raw materials, energy, and other critical items in the event of a PLA blockade. So it would likely not succeed, and it would be a huge risk of escalation for the PRC, where it would likely have to consider whether or not it was willing to ultimately start attacking commercial maritime vessels. So for all that reason, we think this would be a monster risk for the PRC and a huge miscalculation.
Thank you. A follow-up, Dr. Ratner, on strategic ambiguity. When does ambiguity become a weakness to deterrence versus having more clarity and clear commitment to Taiwan?
Well, Representative, what I would say is that we see the PRC anticipating U.S. response to an invasion of Taiwan. They train against it. They assume it's going to happen. And therefore, we don't think there would be additional deterrence value in changing our position away from strategic ambiguity. And in fact, doing that would upset our commitment to the status quo and to opposing unilateral changes to the status quo. So we think there is political cost that would be borne by the people on Taiwan for that kind of political action, and very little benefit in terms of deterrence. We believe today deterrence is strong and deterrence is real.
One last real quick question. You said earlier we weren't funding to 100%. What is it that we need to be funding to for Taiwan compared to where we're at?
The Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act that was passed as part of last year's NDAA includes $2 billion authorization. Just to give you a sense of scale, the global FMF budget is between $6 and $7 billion.
Gentleman's time
It's 90% earmarked.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for shedding so much light on the military side of our deterrence in terms of China and Taiwan. But there's two other great historic events that have taken place here during this time period that reflect on, I think, major areas of deterrence that I'd like to just discuss a little bit more, have you discuss more. One is the looking at the COVID pandemic and the effect on the economy. The second is the war in Ukraine. With the first, I think Ms. Resnick brought clear the economic effects that Taiwan's invasion of Taiwan would have in terms of half of the world's trade going through the straits there, in terms of their chips production. But I'd also like to say a comment on the effects of an aggressive action by China on Taiwan, specifically on how it would affect their economy and how that is a deterrent factor in their calculations. And number two, we did a lot of talking about the administration in terms of Ukraine. Well, what about Congress? You know, we are a capitalist country. We have a military asset base that's built in the private sector in cooperation with our own government, but in the private sector. And when that private sector sees CR after CR after CR and not dealing with a budget, how does that directly affect their ability to produce the assets that we need, their predictability, their ability to get capital in a long-range sense? And secondly, in Ukraine, when Congress is talking about cutting aid to Ukraine, abandoning commitments we had to Ukraine, and we're talking about one of the greatest things we've seen in terms of deterrence, in terms of helping Taiwan, with the partnerships we've built in the region, the new partnerships. If they see that kind of discussion here in Congress about cutting aid, leaving our partners in the lurch, what effect will that have? So I gave you a lot to answer to in a little over 2 minutes, but I'll give you flexibility in answering them and be quiet.
Congressman, maybe I'll just reiterate what I said in response to Mr. Norquist, which is Congress does have an incredibly important role to play here, and we want to work with this committee and the full Congress on resourcing issues precisely for the reasons you described. And again, just to repeat myself, we are looking for a full-year on-time appropriation. That's required for us to implement the strategy that we have written that is focused on integrated deterrence against the PRC. We need support in strengthening our U.S. defense industrial base so we can be better positioned to provide for our own readiness and for our partners. And we do need appropriations against the new authorities that Congress has provided for support for Taiwan that we haven't seen yet. So I think that's really an important role for Congress. What I would say on your first question, very quickly, that the economic effects for the PRC would be devastating. And that's why the PLA is focused on trying to execute a rapid, low-cost invasion that Xi Jinping would view as at acceptable cost. And when we think about combat credible deterrence, we want to ensure that that remains too costly for Xi. And we think we are absolutely there today. And when we talk about the PRC as a pacing challenge, what we are talking about is staying ahead of that cost calculation in the years and decades ahead.
Mr. Keating, thank you for that question. We believe that that demonstrating our resolve with respect to Ukraine is the best way to deter the PRC. Abandoning our partners encourages the PRC to conclude that we will fail to provide for Taiwan's sufficient self-defense. That is exactly the wrong message to be sending. Let me also just say a moment in this last minute about what the lack of an on-time appropriation would do with respect to our defense industry. In the context of a shutdown, which we would all like to avoid, the Bureau of Political Military Affairs in the past, and I can't speak to what would happen in the future. We haven't issued guidance yet, but in the past, the Bureau of Political Military Affairs has been unable to process new licenses for any partner, including Taiwan, has been unable to process new foreign military sales for any partner, including Taiwan, except in the context of an emergency. This is something we would like to avoid.
Great. I'm running out of time. I'll just emphasize you said, without revealing who they are, that the Taiwanese people are looking at what's happening in Taiwan. They are having discussions about what's happening here in Congress. So I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Gallagher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, the president in Vietnam said, and I quote, "Look, I think China has a difficult economic problem right now for the whole range of reasons that relate to the international growth and lack thereof, and the policies that China has followed. And so I don't think it's going to cause China to invade Taiwan. And matter of fact, the opposite. It probably doesn't have the same capacity that it had before. Do you agree with the assessment that China's economic difficulties will make them less aggressive militarily? And if so, what empirical support would you offer in support of that hypothesis?"
Congress, I would say in response that the Defense Department were focused on strengthening combat credible deterrence.
You don't have a view, I mean, you're the China expert in the building. Do you have a view on whether China's economic difficulties make them more or less aggressive militarily, which I would argue is directly relevant to the question of how do we defend against such an invasion?
Congressman, I'd be happy to provide a more detailed answer to that in a classified session.
So you don't want to answer that in public session?
To give you an assessment based upon the information that we have, I would prefer to do that in a classified session.
Just an assessment based on your deep expertise, for which I have enormous respect and which I've repeatedly praised publicly.
Congressman, I appreciate that. Again, I'd rather take that question into a classified session.
Okay. The president in that same press conference said that our goal is not to contain China. Do you agree with that? And if you do, what is our end state with respect to China if it's not containment?
We articulate our goal as it relates to the PRC as integrated deterrence, and we articulate our role in the Indo-Pacific as building a free and open Indo-Pacific alongside our allies and partners.
Okay. The president in that same press conference said, I don't want to get this wrong, the only existential threat humanity faces, even more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming going above 1.5 degrees in the next 20 to 10 years. Do you agree with that assessment that the threat of global warming is greater than the threat of thermonuclear war with China?
What I would say, Congressman, the 2022 National Defense Strategy identifies the PRC as the department's top pacing challenge, and that's what we're focused on as our priority at the department.
So is the president suggesting something different than the prioritization in the NDS?
I'm not going to speak for the president, sir. I'm just going to say, as it relates to the 2022 NDS, I believe we are focused on the pacing challenge of the PRC, I believe, with the consistency and focus and urgency that you're suggesting is required.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I actually think the question of prioritization matters greatly because, as you know, there are some who suggest that, indeed, we need to cooperate with China when it comes to climate change. I would argue this is naive at best, and China has no interest in sort of abiding by commitments that are made at COP27 or any other international fora. As their record demonstrates, and in a practical level, our attempts to engage with China on that issue undermine the urgency that we need to take key defensive action, particularly when it comes to our military competition. Along those lines, when it comes to this renewal of engagement as a foundation of our foreign policy with respect to China, we've had 4 cabinet-level officials, or 3 plus Secretary or former Secretary Kerry. How has that improved the security situation in the Indo-Pacific?
Do you want to take this to the State Department?
Secretary Blinken has been very clear that we will cooperate where our interests align, but that we're not afraid of competing and we're not afraid of contesting where we must. So we believe that we need to manage this relationship responsibly. The American people expect us to manage the relationship responsibly. Our allies and partners expect us to manage the relationship responsibly, and so we'll continue to do that. That involves continuing to have open lines of communication. Is
it not true that our attempts to establish a crisis communication channel, military-to-military communication, have been rebuffed by the Chinese Communist Party?
Absolutely. We have, Secretary Austin has said repeatedly that we are interested in maintaining open lines of communication, and by and large, with some exceptions, but by and large, the PLA has not been responsive to that.
And then finally, in the 36 seconds I have left, putting on my Select Committee on China hat, taking off my HASC hat, we just did a war game in New York that focused on the economic and financial aspects of this conflict. I guess I just sort of assumed that there were people at Treasury and Commerce wargaming and doing sort of financial and economic escalation the way we do rigorously when it comes to conventional and nuclear escalation. Have you, Dr. Ratner, ever participated in such an exercise with Treasury and Commerce officials?
Yes, I have. I have participated in multiple interagency tabletop exercises with representatives from Treasury and Commerce in which they are considering the employment of economic tools as part of crisis and conflict.
Well, my time has expired. I look forward to following up offline.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. The National Defense Strategy states conflict with the People's Republic of China is neither inevitable or desirable. I firmly believe this, and I think and hope that most, if not all, members here in this room agree. It is crucial the United States remain committed to Taiwan's national security and continue providing the tools necessary to detour any aggression from the PRC. Dr. Ratner, can you speak to how well received U.S. assistance is by Taiwan, and can you characterize how some of the assistance we provided complements Taiwan's own efforts?
Yes, absolutely. Under the Taiwan Relations Act, we are committed to supporting Taiwan in its self-defense. That is an important part of their effort to be able to defend their democracy. And we are focused with them on identifying the right capabilities and getting to them at the right time. So again, be happy to answer these questions in much greater detail in a classified setting, but absolutely.
Thank you. We've heard there are issues with the foreign military sales process with an estimated $19 billion backlog. The State Department has a 10-point plan to retool FMS, and the Department of Defense has the FMS Tiger Team to highlight and implement recommendations to improve FMS. Ms. Resnick and Dr. Ratner, can you speak to where these plans are and how you see them improving FMS? And can you both discuss coordination between the State Department and the Department of Defense on improving FMS?
Congressman, thanks for your question and the opportunity to go a little bit deeper into FMS 2023. Just to clarify, the $19 billion that you reference were cases that have been approved by the State Department already, that have been approved by Congress already. And so these are cases that are awaiting production. So we rely on our defense industry to produce for our partners and for ourselves for our own readiness. And so these are cases that are in the queue for production. We see that, and the data confirms that cases go through the State Department. 95% of cases go through the State Department within 48 hours. So we are working on those 5%, those stickier foreign policy issues, and how we can unstick them. We are working on making sure that we remain competitive in this age of heightened strategic competition globally. And so our recommendations include better training for our security cooperation officers so that they better understand the authorities under which they're operating. We have worked on prioritizing FMS cases according to the National Defense Strategy, worked on anticipatory policies so that we don't have to wait for a partner to ask us for a decision, but we may have a decision already done and gone through all of the recommendations, all of the approval process before a partner even asks. So we have a number of recommendations, and we're working to implement them now.
Anything to add, Dr. Ratner?
Yeah, I would just say thank you for Das Resnick for handling a number of the FMS questions today. It turns out the Defense Department also ran a Tiger team co-led by senior officials from OSD policy as well as acquisition and sustainment to look at a number of similar issues in concert with the State Department through the entire life cycle of the FMS process and found the same conclusions, which is the predominance of the delays that we're now seeing are tied to industrial-based production challenges, and that many of industry's challenges could be solved by investing more in production lines to increase speed and capacity. So again, I would come back to what I said a few minutes ago. We are looking for partnership with Congress to try to strengthen the U.S. defense industrial base together in a bipartisan fashion, and that's how we're going to get after ensuring that we have not only the capabilities for our own readiness, but also for our vital allies and partners.
I have a limited time, so I'm going to get the question out. You might have to give me the answer later. Dr. Ratner and Ms. Resnick, in recent years, the PRC has increased gray zone pressures, including increased frequency and complex military exercises and aircraft, manned and unmanned, flying closer to Taiwan than in years past. Do you think there are steps Taiwan could take to detour gray zone pressure?
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congress authorized President Biden to send $1 billion in defense aid to Taiwan during fiscal year 2023 through Presidential Drawdown Authority. The fiscal year ends in 11 days, but the president has only sent about 1/3 of that military aid to Taiwan. Ms. Resnick, why has President Biden withheld $655 million in Presidential Drawdown Authority from Taiwan?
Thanks for the question. This is a very important authority, and we thank Congress for that. This authority is now in permanent law, so we expect to be able to use this authority in the future. The PDA the Presidential Drawdown Authority is one of many authorities that we use.
Does that money expire in 11 days? $655 million that you didn't spend in FY23?
It resets the clock. Even if there is a shutdown, even if there is a CR, it resets the clock to $1 billion in authority, and then it is up to the Defense Department to see what they have in stock. So.
Yeah, I guess, Congressman Banks, what I would clarify is there is no money. There was an authorization for $1 billion against which Congress did not appropriate replenishment funds, different from how it has done with Ukraine. So the Presidential Drawdown Authority that the department has used, it has taken out of Hyde. And as Secretary Austin has said, the department is looking to Congress to appropriate against those authorities so they can be best leveraged by the department in...
difference between FMF and the Presidential Drawdown Authority? Or is there no difference? You're saying there is no difference?
With foreign military financing, there is no particular earmark for Taiwan. We have found out of Hyde $80 million in the supplemental.
You're saying there is not $655 million that has been appropriated
Correct.
to provide in presidential drawdown authority to Taiwan that's going to expire in 11 days.
That's correct. It was $1 billion was authorized, $0 were appropriated, $345 million were taken out of Hyde.
Okay, so the Taiwanese often complain about the Biden administration offering them loans rather than outright support. Can you talk about the difference and why the Biden administration has only offered them loans?
We have not. We have also offered them grant assistance, which we are working to implement now. This was just notified in the last couple of weeks. Congress authorized loans, and we understand that they may not be interested in those loans, but we are offering grant assistance. We have offered grant assistance, and we believe that it is in our interest to do so.
Why are they not interested in the loans?
I think that the rate may not be very competitive, and that is, again, something that we are working on with FMS 2023.
What can we do about that?
Well, we have asked for authorities in the supplemental to be able to provide a better rate to partners, and so we look forward to working with Congress about that.
Can you compare those rates with what they might find from elsewhere?
Correct. We need to have a competitive rate.
Can you tell us, the committee, on what those rates, why our rates aren't competitive versus rates they might find elsewhere?
I'm happy to take that for the record. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this discussion of funding and appropriations and all of that, how would a government shutdown affect our ability to arm Taiwan and deter aggression in the Pacific?
I can start based on a State Department perspective, and again, I wasn't at the State Department. I was here on the Hill when we had the last shutdown. But based on past precedent, the State Department would be unable to process new licenses for Taiwan or for any other partner absent an emergency. We would be unable to process new foreign military sales. We would also be unable to process new foreign military financing, which would not be included under a shutdown. And just to clarify, when Congress moves forward on defense spending, that does not include the State Department. And so, therefore, the foreign military financing budget is not included in defense spending. And so even if Congress moves forward with defense spending, the State Department and our partners would suffer.
So the House leadership sent us home last week without even voting on defense appropriations, which should be the easiest of 12 appropriations bills to pass. If we, by some miracle, avoid a shutdown and just have a continuing resolution, a CR, is that okay? Or how does that affect our ability to arm Taiwan and deter aggression?
Congressman, from a broader regional perspective, we are looking for a full appropriation against our budget request. The continuing resolution prevents us from making new investments in our own capabilities. It also prevents us from initiating new major military construction projects in the region associated with our forward posture. So yes, this affects our ability to support key partners like Taiwan, but it also affects our ability to build the kind of deterrent in the U.S. military that we're seeking to build.
Dr. Radner, when we talk about supporting our partner in Taiwan, one of the questions that I hear from constituents, people back home, is, are the people of Taiwan going to stand up and fight? And I have understood that there is a perception among some in Taiwan for some time that a peaceful resolution to this crisis would be ideal, and perhaps that they would just follow the Hong Kong model. Is the Hong Kong model popular in Taiwan right now, and what do you think about their willingness to actually fight off aggression from the PRC?
Congressman, what we have seen in recent years is a Taiwan people and Taiwan government that has clearly signaled a willingness to invest in its own defense and invest in its own resilience and take difficult political decisions and political reforms to do just that. We have seen significant increases in their defense budget. And I should just say, we see them resisting PRC coercion every day. in terms of the economic and military and political coercion and influence that they're experiencing, and they have stood up for themselves and stood up for their democracy.
I think it's a good point that a lot of people don't understand is in the same way that the Ukrainians were really at war for the last 8 years, Taiwan is feeling the effects of PRC aggression literally every single day. General McGee, when I was last in Taiwan in October, looking at this as a Marine infantry officer, I saw a territory that was very defensible, kind of ideally defensible. I saw some very enthusiastic work by the people of Taiwan and their army to exercise, to get out there, dig trench lines and whatnot. But I also saw a lot of room for improvement where some advice from us would be helpful in developing the real tactics on the ground to be most effective in the event of an invasion. What are we doing to help improve their capabilities in the same way that we helped improve the capabilities of the Ukrainians before Russia started that illegal war?
Sir, I'll just say when you look at a nation's ability to fight or any militaries, I think it comes down to a couple key factors. They need to have a capability. They need to have a capacity, so they need to have those assets in the numbers. They need to have competence in terms of their ability to execute any form of military operations, confidence in their leadership and at every single level, and then most importantly, they've got to have that will to fight. I think when we do any work with people of Taiwan, specifically with their military, most especially just recently in Camp Grayling up in Michigan, hosted an exercise where they brought an infantry battalion to Michigan to conduct their operations. I think everyone who was part of that exercise was impressed with what we saw from Taiwan's army, their willingness on all of those factors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of the witnesses for being here today. U.S. policy and strategic ambiguity when it comes to the Taiwans has been steadfast and consistent for decades. However, the policy is undermined when leaders of major defense companies come to the aid of the Chinese Communist Party, making public statements such as, and I quote, "Taiwan is an integral part of China," close quote. What messages do you think these type statements send to the CCP?
Thanks for your question. There's been no change in our government policy. What has changed is the scale and sophistication of the PLA's intense pressure on Taiwan. We work with the defense industry quite a bit. Obviously, there are some commercial interests there, but we work with the defense industry to make sure that we can help Taiwan rise to meet that threat that the PRC is posing to Taiwan.
Thank you. Last week, China announced sanctions against Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman for providing weapons to Taiwan. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that sounds like a badge of honor to me. If you're a U.S. defense company and the CCP friendly, maybe you should be reevaluating your business model. Back in June, the Department of Defense approved a tasking memo to help accelerate institutional processes for foreign military sales. In your opinion, what are some of the red tape barriers in place that keep your departments from fully unleashing the defense industrial base and improving FMS relationships with allies and partners?
Thank you so much for the question. We have 10 recommendations that we have included in our FMS 2023, including using anticipatory policies so that we don't have to wait for the partner to come to us, so that we understand what a partner may need and be able to anticipate that approval. We have begun to work with security cooperation officers at embassies around the world to be able to make sure that we're managing partners' expectations appropriately. We are working on competitive financing. It is not a secret that U.S. defense industry provides the best technology in the world, but it is also expensive. So we need to be able to compete with our strategic competitors and even our friendly competitors.
How can Congress help advance FMS acquisition, prioritization, and award timelines?
Thanks for that question. I think that the most important role that Congress can play is through your discussions with defense industry of making sure that you are able to underscore the urgency of the situation with our partners around the world, the need for us to be able to meet the demand that we're seeing globally so that we can remain a reliable partner.
China continues its aggressive island building and military exercises in the South China Sea. Just this weekend, the CCP launched over 100 warplanes, which included fighter jets toward Taiwan. It's bullying, plain and simple. This year's NDAA includes a provision that requires the DoD and the State Department to establish a comprehensive training, advising, and institutional capacity building program with Taiwan's military. What are some of the things you believe should be kept in mind while developing this program?
I think as we take a look at what the Taiwan military, and their mission that they have, I think one of the critical factors, because what they need to be able to counter as an airborne and amphibious operation is the idea of a joint concept. And I think if you know the history of our own military, that's a very sophisticated and complicated process to get there. And I think any work that we could do to assist them in improving joint capabilities, that integration of air, sea, and land, space, and cyber to be able to strengthen their defense, I think would be time well spent.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. The chair now recognizes the Congresswoman from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all of our witnesses for testifying. We've heard a lot about this backlog, and I kind of want to drill down on it a little bit more. I think we're all very concerned about the backlog, making sure we get Taiwan what it needs. But I think it's important to be clear exactly where this backlog is coming from. Daz Resnick, as you said, these sales passed through the State Department within a matter of days. And Dr. Ratner, as you said, one of the primary issues is that the industry is moving too slow. One of the things that's really frustrating to me is that when we talk to industry about this, we hear time and again that what they need is a demand signal. But I think it's very clear that they have this demand signal, and they have had for years for a lot of these weapons that Taiwan is in line to get. I think it'd be helpful, Deputy Assistant Secretary Resnick, if you could expand on what both you and Dr. Ratner have hinted about, and really what is needed from the industry to address this backlog, and how Congress can help make this happen.
Thank you so much for that question, and for really drilling down on what is needed from industry. It is true that industry needs a demand signal. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. We live in a capitalist society. That is truly important. We believe that we have sent that demand signal, and working with industry to be able to open new production lines, to be able to find ways to have either more hours for workers to be producing what we need. We have seen that with respect to F-16s. We have seen that with respect to Javelins, that industry is putting some of their own money. This needs to be widespread. And this is a point that our very senior leadership has made to industry about what is needed from them now.
Thank you. And Dr. Ratner, could you talk about how your department's working with industry to address this backlog?
Yeah, absolutely. We are likewise engaging with industry to try to understand how we can accelerate some of these timelines. We have had, as I mentioned, an FMS Tiger team within the department to look at this same set of issues, recommended embracing within the department a more data-driven approach, which would inform our engagement with industry again, and more senior level attention to this matter as well, among other issues. But I think the consistent demand signal and the health of the defense industrial base at the end of the day is where we're going to see improvements here. The process issues are really important, and we're focused on those, but ultimately the strength and health of the U.S. defense industrial base is going to be the key variable.
Thank you, and I just want to emphasize that we need the defense industrial base to step up themselves. They are part of our national security, and they benefit from our national security. And I think, especially when it comes to these specific weapons we're talking about for Taiwan, the demand signal has been there for many, many years. And the fact that they haven't made the investments, to me, is frankly neglectful. Really quickly, I just want to go to other assistance we could be giving Taiwan. We've talked a lot about the lethal assistance, but Dr. Ratner, in your testimony, you also talked about supporting the integration of Taiwan's military and civilian agencies on a range of issues like food, medical supplies, energy, infrastructure. Can you elaborate more on what this sort of non-lethal assistance looks like and how your department and the State Department work together to make sure that this is all integrated?
Absolutely, and would be happy to provide much more detail in a classified setting. What I would say is one of the elements that is widely recognized as important for Taiwan is to have defense in depth. And as General McGee described earlier, the difficulties of actually invading the island, the defense of the island itself is incredibly important. And therein, the integration between Taiwan's civilian agencies and its military is a really important piece of that, as well as some of the institutional reforms that I described earlier as it relates to reserve reform and others. So there's absolutely a broad-based set of engagements around these issues, and I'd be happy to discuss them in more detail in another setting.
I can speak to a little bit, although it's a little bit outside of my purview. We're working closely with Taiwan's interagency to respond effectively in a crisis and build societal resilience. That includes ensuring sufficient water, energy, food, other critical resources to build preparedness. We're also working to support Taiwan's energy security, encouraging Taiwan's regulatory bodies to require a larger emergency energy stockpile to modernize its grid. Taiwan currently imports 98% of its energy resources, and so we are looking to help Taiwan to accelerate their deployment of renewable energy.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Guam, Mr. Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. As Guam's sole member of Congress, this hearing is uniquely important to me. Many of the analysts who predict that China will invade Taiwan in the coming years also predict that China will launch preemptive strikes on Guam. To protect my home, I must advocate for stabilizing policies in the region and for an effective deterrence against CCP aggression. So my first question, Major General McGee and Assistant Secretary Ratner, I've been an advocate for Guam missile defense because the safety of my constituents is my focus. In line with unfunded priority requests from the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, I was able to increase funding levels for Guam missile defense in the House-passed NDAA. As I continue these efforts, I would like to ask what role a robust missile defense of Guam plays in deterring Chinese aggression against Taiwan.
Well, Congressman, let me start off just by saying that as administration documents like the Missile Defense Review have made clear, Guam is part of the United States, and any missile attack on Guam or any other U.S. territory would be met with an appropriate response. That is in part why the Department is requesting $1.8 billion in the FY24 budget for the defense of Guam. This investment builds off of the $892 million appropriated by Congress in FY23, so nearly 100% increase. And the Department's efforts include active missile defenses, enhanced regional deterrence and defense posture, ally and partner assurance measures, and increased readiness for all the reasons that you described.
And sir, from the Joint Force perspective, certainly we have taken the lessons learned from Ukraine and are applying it to the way that we provide a comprehensive air defense against all threats. And of course, we've now seen it coming from multiple. It's not just, you know, it comes at every altitude, from drones all the way up to missiles. And so we are learning and tremendous amounts by watching that conflict, and I think we are continuing to get better at that.
Thank you. Ms. Redsing, I believe the strong relationship with our regional partners is the path towards stability in East Asia. Given their proximity to Taiwan and deep cultural ties to the United States, one extremely important partnership is the Philippines. In 2020, the Quad Plus dialogues included attendees such as Israel, Brazil, Vietnam, and New Zealand, alongside with the usual Quad members. We have the Philippines. Why have the Philippines not been included in the Quad Plus dialogues, And when will the State Department begin to include such important regional ally in our multilateral discussions?
The Philippines remains a very important partner to the United States. I will let Dr. Ratner discuss a little bit about our EDCA announcements, but let me just say that in recent years, we have included the Philippines in a number of regional engagements. We have also boosted our investment in security in the Philippines through foreign military financing. And we have launched a Philippine security sector assistance roadmap with the Philippines this year to be able to understand the threats that the Philippines faces, how those interact with so the understanding the mutual threats, and so that we can work together to build a more effective security assistance framework for both countries.
I would just say strengthening and revitalizing our alliance with the Philippines has been one of the most important advances and achievements of this administration. We have, over the last year, announced new EDCA sites, the agreement that we have with the Philippines for U.S. access to Philippine facilities. As you know, we don't have permanent forces or bases there, but we do have access to their sites under a decade-old agreement, and we have increased the breadth of those sites over the past years to more strategic locations. We have also renewed bilateral maritime activity in the waters around the Philippines, which was an incredibly important development in terms of strengthening deterrence in the region. And we are integrating them with our closest allies and partners. I would just note that at the Shangri-La Dialogue this past year, for the first time ever, we held a defense ministerial between the defense ministers from the United States, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines. In this kind of networking among our allies and partners, we believe is really important to the progress we're making toward our common vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moylan. The chair now recognizes Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over the past few years, we have seen a significant increase in bills and resolutions introduced here in Congress that would, in some form or another, politically and diplomatically elevate Taiwan's status. Unsurprisingly, the PRC has strongly protested these symbolic gestures as deeply destabilizing and threatening to the basic framework that the One China policy provides. There's also been some public commentary from experts about the risks posed by these types of symbolic gestures to Taiwan's security. For example, a recent Council on Foreign Relations task force recommended that the U.S. should avoid symbolic political and diplomatic gestures that provoke a Chinese response but do not meaningfully improve Taiwan's defense capabilities, resilience, or economic competitiveness. Ms. Resnick, how does the PRC interpret or perceive congressional initiatives that are symbolic in nature that suggest an elevation of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship into formal relations? And how do these symbolic gestures affect diplomatic efforts between the administration and the PRC as well?
What we are focused on is improving Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. Symbols of sovereignty are one way that we can do that, but we don't think that that is the most effective way for us to be able to do that. So we would focus more on those areas that provide Taiwan with real security and not symbolic security.
Thank you. Major General McGee, how has the PRC used such symbolic gestures to escalate tensions, further alter the status quo, and cross-strait relations? How would you assess the impact of these symbolic gestures on deterring PRC aggression overall?
I'd like to defer to my policy friend who may have a better insight on that piece, frankly.
Look, maybe what I'll say here is part of the reason why this matters is because as we have spoken about at the hearing today, what we see is a trend of growing international attention among the international community to this issue. And the more countries around the world are committed to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, the less likely it is for Beijing to initiate military action because they understand what the repercussions would be on the international stage. As part of that, it is really important that the region see who the aggressor is here and who the one is here that is precipitating conflict and coercion. And therefore, what we see is day-to-day PRC military, economic, political pressure against Taiwan. And it's important that Taiwan itself, but also the United States, is not taking political actions that the Indo-Pacific region and the world see as leading to heightening tensions. So I thought the prompt of your question was really well put and support everything you said there.
Thank you. Maybe to take it to a slightly different direction, looking at our forward posture in the Western Pacific, I believe both Dr. Ratner and Major General McGee's written testimony emphasizes the importance of a forward-leaning U.S. force in the Western Pacific and a rigorous campaigning as part of our efforts to deter aggression against Taiwan and our allies and partners in the region. Dr. Ratner, perhaps this question is for you. As you know, we have addressed significant challenges with military infrastructure needs in Hawaii, where I am from, and that left unaddressed could complicate our ability to support and sustain increased efforts in our forward posture and campaigning in the Western Pacific. In your assessment, how important is it to your work and in reassuring our allies and partners in the region that we invest in sustaining and upgrading our military infrastructure?
Our forward posture and presence in the region, including in Hawaii, is fundamentally important to our defense position in the region. It's fundamentally important to deterrence, and it's an area where this administration has been incredibly focused and frankly made really historic advances over the past year.
Thank you. And you know, as you know, Dr. Ratner, we are close to finalizing renegotiations of the compacts of free association with Palau, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. How critical is it that Congress expeditiously approve these agreements in terms of our forward posture in the Western Pacific? And as we approach the end of the fiscal year, why is it so important that Congress provide funding for these countries under a continuing resolution? You know, if we fail to act, do we actually provide the PRC with a window of opportunity, even a temporary one, to fill the void and complicate a very strategic relationship?
I would just say the compact states and the COFA agreement is incredibly important for our position in the region, as you described, and we look forward to working with Congress to find a solution to sustain those agreements.
And clearly, funding and support for this now and going forward is absolutely critical to maintain the relationship and not provide the PRC with any opportunity to come and fill the gap.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Takuda. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Xi Jinping has repeatedly and publicly stated that he's willing to use force to unify China and bring Taiwan, as he says, back under control in one nation. I find that comment interesting because the Communist Chinese have never ruled in Taiwan, and I just think that's a historical note to mention. He's called it a natural requirement and for them to be reunited, in stating that the use of force is their policy, preparing for a contingency to unify Taiwan by force if perceived as necessary by Beijing. And then former Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Philip Davidson stated in 2021, when talking about China's potential for invading Taiwan, said, and I quote, "I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years." And that means, of course, by 2027. Now, while nobody wants war, what is the best way to prevent it? And you know, you have to take great care when you talk about, when you use comparisons to the Nazis or Hitler and things like that, because it's you know, overused. But I think it is instructive to listen to what dictators say. In January of '39, Hitler gave a speech and he outlined two goals. He wanted war and he wanted to annihilate the Jewish race in Europe. And then, of course, in September that year, he went ahead and tried to accomplish both objectives. And then in 2021, in July, Vladimir Putin released an essay, and it was on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. And he went on to say, essentially, that they're not like brothers, they share the same soul, which, of course, is rather chilling. And then 7 months later, he claimed he was going to liberate and denazify Ukraine. So I want to offer these examples, not to, of course, stoke fears, but to illustrate that we need to listen to what dictators are saying. And we can all hope for the best, but we need to prepare for the worst. And I'm a little afraid that we're not necessarily maybe preparing for the worst. Dr. Ratner, if you could, and I'm being not facetious here, but serious, I don't know what the Biden administration policy is vis-a-vis Taiwan and a potential Chinese attack. Will we defend Taiwan if attacked? Is that the policy?
The policy, Congressman, is one of strategic ambiguity.
Okay.
And has been for decades, and we believe that remains most important to maintain that status quo in our policy. We are clear-eyed about the PRC
I apologize.
threat.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we just have very limited time. And I wanted to get to your point in your answer about strategic ambiguity. I think that was an okay policy when China didn't have the capability to invade Taiwan successfully, which clearly years ago they had not the capability to do so. They have it now. So I would argue that, well, let me ask you this question. Do you think Xi Jinping is more likely than not to invade Taiwan if there were two circumstances? If the United States president, whoever it was, said, we will defend Taiwan. That's scenario A. If attacked by China, the Chinese communists. Or we maintain strategic ambiguity. Which, if you are sitting in a think tank or you're in the war room at the White House, what do you think is more likely?
I think the effects of changing our policy to one of strategic clarity away from strategic ambiguity would not strengthen deterrence by the United States. I think it would increase political tensions and make conflict more likely, and I think it would cause us to lose the support of our allies and partners, as we described earlier.
Okay. I respectfully disagree. I think you have to do it in the right way. We're not really changing the political policy at all. We're not saying that we support Chinese or Taiwanese independence, because I do think in what you just said that would exacerbate the issue. All we're saying is if China uses force, then we'll defend Taiwan. I would argue that it's going to increase deterrence because deterrence work. We know what dictators and authoritarians do. They avoid strength and they attack weakness. If he thinks he can grab it, let me ask you this. If Xi thought he could grab Taiwan, have 6 months maybe of economic sanctions, and then the world, much like Crimea happened with Putin, do you think he'd do it?
When we think about deterrence, what we think about is ensuring that he does not believe he could exact aggression against Taiwan at acceptable cost.
So but do you think then if he did what Putin did, Putin successfully grabbed Crimea? I think we'd all agree with that. Do you think if Xi could follow that model, he would do it?
I guess it depends what you mean by the Putin model. If
the world largely forgot
Xi
about what
Jinping
happened
believed by invading,
we normalized in 6 to 12 months, and everybody went back to the way they were living. That's what I mean.
Look, I don't want to get into hypotheticals. What I would say is I understand the questions that you're asking, and it is at the heart of how we think about deterrence and ensuring that Xi Jinping does not believe he can do that at acceptable cost. And we think today that is the case, and that's why we say deterrence is real and strong. That's why we say we do not think an invasion is imminent or inevitable, and we are doing more than ever to keep it that way.
I'm
Congressman's time is
I'm afraid that
expired.
he may think in very short order that it is acceptable.
The
Thank
chair
you,
now
Madam Chair.
the chair now recognizes the Congresswoman from Virginia, Congresswoman McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. A key support mechanism for our military alliances in the Pacific is a robust diplomatic presence. Yet we face the very real prospect of severe cuts to the state and foreign operations budget that funds the State Department, USAID, and other diplomatic programs. How would significant cuts to the international affairs budget complicate efforts to maintain alliances and ensure we are able to present a united front against political aggression by the Chinese government against Taiwan?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. We have used the diplomatic budget effectively throughout the Indo-Pacific to be able to shore up alliances and partnerships where it comes to reimagining our alliances and partnerships with Japan, with Vietnam, with Korea, with Taiwan, of course, with the Philippines. If there are cuts to the state foreign ops budget, and I can speak from the perspective of the IMED account, our peacekeeping operations account, and our foreign military financing, because these budgets are so heavily earmarked, we have very little flexibility. If there were cuts, what we would have to do is look at anything that isn't earmarked and put it on the cutting room floor. There is no earmark for Taiwan. There are very few earmarks in the Indo-Pacific, and so we would be looking at at keeping status quo, which is that 70% of the FMF budget is in the Middle East. We cannot afford to do that.
Thank you. Secretary Ratner or Secretary Resnick, the United States, Japan, and South Korea recently concluded a summit that made progress on a number of fronts to expand trilateral collaboration. Can you elaborate on how we are expanding collaboration with our trilateral allies, particularly the joint military industrial-based capacity expansion and specialization, and what areas we are looking to further expand coordination in the future?
Sure, I'm happy to start to say that the leader-level meeting that President Biden hosted at Camp David truly was historic in terms of bringing together two of our closest allies around the world, Japan and South Korea, and I think there's no question that all three of those countries are more secure when we are all working more closely together. During that summit, there were two particular announcements that were made as it relates to military cooperation. One was to advance a program on data sharing for early missile warning data between the three countries, particularly related to the North Korea threat. We're making progress on that and hope to have that in place by the end of this calendar year. And secondarily, in addition, to be developing a more regularized program of trilateral military exercises and cooperation. That's also under development, and we think this is a really positive trend, and it's one that is not just happening in Northeast Asia. I should say that we are working increasingly in combination with our allies and partners, Japan, Australia, and the United States, also as a trilateral configuration are engaging in new and unprecedented forms of military cooperation, and we think this is really important for deterrence and for regional security.
Thank you. One of the alarming but not unexpected dynamics of Russia's war with Ukraine has been the tendency of African nations to remain uninvolved or continue to engage with Russia despite its gruesome war crimes, which I would characterize as a colonial war of aggression. Would we expect a similar dynamic to play out in a Chinese invasion of Taiwan? And how are we working to increase engagement with our African partners that would make them less likely to side with China or continue to treat China normally should it move aggressively toward Taiwan?
Thanks for that question. And this is something that we work on every day globally, but including in Africa, to make the case for the rules-based international order and how Africa especially can benefit from it. We have a lot of work to do here, and especially in the context of Wagner operations in Africa, we have a lot of work to do in order to remain competitive. That is something that we have started in a number of countries, and we're happy to come back and brief you in a different environment. We understand that there are some lessons learned from these kind of conversations that could apply in a Taiwan scenario, and we'll continue to work those relationships.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Georgia, Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for coming here today and testifying. I think everybody in this room agrees that Taiwan is extremely important to us strategically. It's the linchpin of the first island of the chain, and as for now, we obviously have a lot of critical things going on in the area. I'm worried about the technologies that it contains as far as we really maintain the leader in AI industry, but where the AI chips are produced is an island that entirely produces 100% of our AI chips. My concern is if China does what it says it's going to do, and I'll take them for their face of their word, by 2027, and we don't have a plant up here to take over that, what capabilities, and I'll direct this to you, Major General McGee, what capabilities or what kind of agreement do we have with the Taiwanese in denying Chinese access to that AI production in the case of an invasion, or our access to that same production? Because without AI, of course, being the leading technology of our day, matter of fact, of any day, that will affect our economy and our ability to produce the next leading edge of technology, how do we keep them from access or obtaining that and keeping us from denying that access?
So I appreciate that question. I think export control, though, might be more of a Department of State question.
I'm actually talking in the case of an invasion, so actually a war. If they do what they say, by force, try to take Taiwan, and you can defer this question, but it goes back to a conflict where Taiwan and China are in conflict. How do we maintain our access to a hard value asset, which we cannot produce ourselves? And we're 2 years away from it, even if we do groundbreaking now. And how do we deny the Chinese from obtaining that same hard asset in a time of war?
I'd be happy to discuss that in another setting, but would say, of course, the broader question of how do we maintain our advantages in peacetime, and then how do we maintain resilience or build resilience into crisis and conflict is something we absolutely are looking at in terms of trying to increase our supply chain resiliency of our defense industrial base and support programs with domestic and alternative materials, as well as innovative manufacturing. So you're identifying an important challenge, and we're laser focused on it, and would be happy to follow up in a different setting.
Okay, so we'll put the war stuff on the table, because I get that. I'm a military guy. So let's talk peacetime. One of the things I think is great, maybe in a sort of strange way, is the Arunachal-Pradesh region of India, which is disputed by China, which has about 300,000 troops on the border there disputing that. That's just per side. So you have 600,000 troops right there in that region, which I think they have to rotate every 3 months or so because the altitude is so high, which is a great deterrence when you talk about what China has to face in that region, which I think is great to have great strategic allies in that area. When we talk about deterrence, obviously we did a horrible job of deterring Russia from invading Ukraine. We knew he'd talked about it. Nobody took it at face value. Then he did it. We didn't do a good job. We weren't strong enough to deter them from doing that. What are we doing deterrence-wise other than saying we're investing in the military, we have great training, we have great assets, but what are we doing to truly make China think second thoughts other than supporting Ukraine, which I think is a great deterrence, saying, you know, we are committed to our friends. But what other things are we bringing to the table to make China go, I really don't want any part of that, rather than what we just discussed, where we can't really give a good answer as far as what do we do when they actually invade?
Maybe I'll start and ask General McGee to build upon the question. I mean, look, we have a national defense strategy that has informed a budget that is focused on the capabilities that we need to deter and prevail, if necessary, against the PRC. For the first time, a strategy focused on the PRC as the primary challenge, and our budget request reflects that. So we are investing in the capabilities we need. Joint Staff has been working very concertedly on the joint warfighting concept and operational concepts that are designed to overcome operational problems that the PRC is trying to present. So it's capabilities and concepts. We are building out our forward defense perimeter in the Indo-Pacific and have made really important gains over the last year in Japan, in the Philippines, in Australia, in Papua New Guinea, such that we are forward in the region, and we are strengthening our alliances and partnerships, including in ways that are relevant to potential China-related contingencies.
And I know I'm out of time, so I'll just reinforce how important the Quad is, how important our alliances and strategic alliances are, and also our investment in the area, not just in what we do, because we don't like nuclear powers to go against each other, but investment in other strategically important allies in the region. That's why we do what we do. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Congresswoman from New Jersey, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you. First, I want to thank all of you for your hard work during these really troubling times as we face a variety of complex pressures around the world. As a member of the Select Committee on Strategic Competition with the Chinese Communist Party, we know that sufficient basing, supply chains, logistics efforts in the Indo-PACOM are critically important, but also the role of ensuring that economic factors at play are another critical and sometimes as important role as we, the CCP, and our global partners react to the Taiwanese contingency. So I secured in this year's NDAA an amendment to have DoD analyze where they can better partner with the Commerce Department so we can ensure that economic and business factors are thought of as we game plan our Indo-Pacific efforts and assess consequences of our actions. To each of you, Can you give a quick overview of your current efforts with commerce and where you might see further partnerships?
I can say that from a State Department perspective, one of the things that we work on, and again, this is a little bit outside of my area in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, but we work on responding to economic coercion, and we work with the interagency on doing that. That is both in the Russia context and in the PRC context. Conducting tabletop exercises with respect to economic coercion and making sure that we're able to shore up our allies and partners if they are victims of that kind of economic coercion.
And the Department of Defense works closely with Commerce as well as Treasury and other economic agencies at the intersection of military and economic affairs. We've worked closely with them on export controls that are related to technology competition with the PRC relevant to PLA modernization. We worked with the Commerce Department and, of course, the Treasury Department on the new policy on outbound investment screening and the executive order on that new process. And we continue to work with the Commerce Department as well as interagency partners on potential response options for both crisis and conflict. So we see them as an integral partner in these scenarios and are continuing to work with them closely.
Ma'am, as you know, this is a complicated and challenging problem, and it needs a whole government approach. As a member, as the Joint Staff, we are fully engaged in the interagency process, and we know that Commerce always has a really important role and a voice in all of those discussions and follow-on actions.
Well, I'm heartened to hear your responses because, as you know, we work a lot on the Armed Services Committee to make sure that we are implementing all the deterrent military capabilities we can, but of course the economic piece is a critical part of that deterrence as well. And as we go forward, how can we as a nation with our critical partner in Taiwan continue to improve interoperability with the Taiwanese? What additional resources can Congress provide to ensure we effectively strengthen our relationship to, again, bolster deterrence?
I think Congress has taken great steps to help increase the military assistance with presidential authorization. I think, as we mentioned here, an appropriation would be tremendously helpful with that as well, as opposed to just an authorization. And I think, as I had mentioned earlier, I think where assistance can be provided to help with Taiwan is their concept of a joint defense in order to defend that island nation from in an air threat, a sea threat, cyber, and space. And that's complicated and difficult within military operations, and I think that's an area of potential great assistance.
From a State Department perspective, we agree that fully funding the Taiwan Enhanced Resiliency Act for foreign military financing would be really useful. That would allow things to get on contract more quickly. But in the meantime, to provide an interim solution as we wait for industry to provide Taiwan with what it needs. Having backfill, just to reiterate Dr. Ratner's point, appropriating backfill for presidential drawdown authority to allow the Defense Department to take from its own stocks, that provides the interim solution until industry is able to provide something to Taiwan.
Well, thank you all again, and can I say thank you as well to the State Department for coming to this hearing. We don't always have you here, and hearing from sort of the whole of government is very, very helpful. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Florida, Mr. Mills.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to start out by going to a question that was posed moments ago, Ms. Resnick, with regards to the approval process. As you know, the DDTC has an actual DDTC response that you can track from your submittals on a DSP-83 to a DSP-5. And I can tell you that your comment that it's 48 hours in approval couldn't be further from the truth. I've watched where multiple times the DSP-5 was held up within the DDTC, and in some cases, they are returned without approval or returned without any type of response, negative or positive, without any actual understanding of why, even when the National Security Council and others have approved it. I also noted that you said about wanting to put the blame on industry, But the reality is that when there's no confidence in industry that the approval is going to come out, and knowing the prolonged timeline in which we submit a proposal, which is supposed to get to the LCTA BAFO, this timeline could be a year, 2 years, which is why I've been very much advocating on procurement reform to ensure that we could also expedite these processes. But again, the idea that it would take industry long to purge lines to ensure that the previous contract didn't actually have any overlapping materials to ensure that it was a legitimate new cost doesn't take industry that long, and I've seen where they've done it. They like to try and add that it costs more than it really does, and I know how they fluff the things on this. And they claim that they use GAAP, our generally accepted accounting principles, but we know how that's been abused. But I want to go back to outcome, not process. The OEM for F-16 parts, and we know we just had roughly 103 Chinese aircraft that had basically incurred a little bit of that on-the-line kind of preemptive response that allowed the Taiwanese having to spin up. Every time they cycle that aircraft with the F-16, that leads to a closer point in which they're actually going to say, okay, well, last time that we did this exercise, we saw a 10% increase in how many people responded than now. That must mean that they don't have the necessary parts. So it gives the Chinese also an intelligence capability to gather whether or not we're responding in a timely manner and whether or not that their ability to ramp up to be able to deter this. So again, providing very strategic military information. What can we do to increase the approvals? Not the amount of funding, not whether it's an FMS, FMF, or a DCS contract, which is even better for the United States economy, but to speed up the actual process, because I can tell you, ma'am, it is not 48-hour approvals.
First of all, Mr. Mills, thank you for your leadership on this and for bringing up these very important issues. Highly advanced defense articles, as you know, must go through an interagency clearance process that the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls manages. So that goes through several different stakeholders in the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs. It also goes through other stakeholders within the State Department and within DoD. Within the Pentagon. We are expediting arms sales to Taiwan as quickly as possible. We approve, as I said, we approve most FMS cases to Taiwan within 48 hours. Those are the items that are under congressional threshold. In industrial production capacity and not states' review process is what is holding us back at this point. With respect to DDTC timelines, I understand that they may be different than FMS timelines, and you probably know best. But understanding from an outcome perspective, what we are trying to do here is improve those timelines regardless of where the choke points are.
Well, I can tell you that I'm committed to try and work with you, your team, the DDTC, to ensure that we actually do get the necessary reform to support industry and support upcoming response. You know, having run in multiple, defense companies in my past, I can tell you my experience, whether it was with a DSP-5, DSP-83, dealing with ATF Form 2, Form 9s, you name it, we know the overregulations. But I do want to ensure that we're able to respond. And I want to comment on something that some of my colleagues have talked about. They keep talking about how we handle Ukraine determines the outcome of Taiwan, and I slightly disagree with this. And I disagree with this because what we don't recognize is the non-kinetic economic and resource supply chain capabilities that China has really tried to bolster in an effort to try and prevent America from having. You know, the Belt and Road Initiative is a good point where they try to look at Eurasian expansion. They look at the domination of Africa and Oceania to cut off Western Hemisphere supply chain while simultaneously utilizing OPEC, WHO, WF, and others as a way to attack the U.S. dollar as a global currency. And we've seen this. So we're not focusing in enough, in my opinion, on the non-kinetic elements of influence, messaging, as well as for the economic warfare of things. And so it's troubling when Joe Biden at the G20 summit talks about how much he wants China's economy to grow while not giving a whole lot of confidence to our abilities to support developing nations. And my final thing, and I know I'm out of time, Madam Chair, but my final thing is that we kept saying that we don't want to send the message that we're being unreliable. Well, we lost that fight 2 years ago when we walked out of Afghanistan. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the congressman from Texas, Mr. Vesey.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for being here today. I wanted to ask about, given Xi's statements about reunification with Taiwan, how should we interpret the CCP's commitment to peaceful reunification while also not renouncing the use of force? And was hoping that y'all had an assessment on those statements that he made.
I would just say I think what he has stated is fairly clear. I think there would be there's a preference for peaceful unification, but the PRC has not renounced its willingness to use force to achieve that aim if it deems necessary and if it believes it can do so at acceptable cost.
And also, how does the Department of Defense assess the progress of the People's Liberation Army Modernization Program as outlined in the China Military Power Report and its implications for Taiwan? General?
I think we've seen an expansion of their capabilities, really sort of a broad-based. We think many of those capabilities would enhance their ability to launch a cross-strait invasion, but that does not mean that would be an easy operational challenge. I still want to highlight the significant operational difficulties for China to be able to conduct that operation.
I know that that CIA Director Burns mentioned that Z instructed the PLA to be ready for a successful invasion by 2027. And I wanted to sort of couple that with something that happened back in the 90s under President Clinton's administration, the third Taiwan Strait crisis. I know that that particular incident that took place back in the 90s, that was a really big influence, on the Chinese as far as the way that they see themselves projected in the region as far as ocean power is concerned. Could you sort of talk a little bit about the significance of that and how maybe that plays a role in how the Chinese think today?
Look, I think what I would say, without getting into their own psychology, what I would say is that we are clear-eyed about the PRC challenge. The National Defense Strategy identifies the PRC as the department's top pacing challenge, and the National Security Strategy describes the PRC as the only country with the will and increasingly the capability to refashion the international community or the international order in line with its authoritarian ambitions. So we are aware of what their preferences are, what they're trying to achieve. However, what we are trying to do is ensure that they cannot achieve those aims at acceptable cost.
Yeah. Also wanted to ask you, we know that the Chinese have been, vehemently opposed to any sort of upgrades on F-16s or new F-16s there to Taiwan. If there were an invasion, how helpful would F-16s actually be for Taiwan? Would they play a significant role? I mean, obviously the Chinese military operation is much more larger and much more expansive than that of the Taiwanese. Would those planes be a help to Taiwan, particularly when there's a new generation of plane out?
We've notified a number of cases during this administration to support Taiwan's F-16 program, which we understand is very useful in defending Taiwan's airspace, particularly with some of the gray zone activities. I can say that this is something that we will continue to support, and we understand that Taiwan finds their F-16s valuable.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, and I just wanted to thank our witnesses for taking time. I know you've been here for a good portion of your day, so we're going to wrap up this committee meeting. I just have a few last questions for you guys. So I had the privilege of traveling with Congressman Whitman last month to Southeast Asia. We went to Japan, the Philippines, and to Taiwan, and could see kind of up close just what is going on in that part of the world. One of the places we went was to Kadena Air Base, and the complaints we heard were about infrastructure and their inability to continue to do their very tip of the spear mission without some infrastructure improvements and some quality of life upgrades. Also talking to the Marines in Okinawa just about housing. I know that we're challenged in even the healthcare department. We're having our military members and their families being seen off base. So we also learned, though, that our allied countries there are very invested in our partnership. So we know that Japan is putting in 2% of their GDP, the highest ever, into their defense budget. We know that Taiwan's is about 2.7%, I think, of their GDP. So we're seeing them put their money where their mouths are. So I guess my ask and my request is, are we also asking them to invest in some infrastructure for us in our base? We're happy to be there, happy to partner and be allies with our friends, but we need some assistance here. Our defense budget is already challenged. Those are parts of the world that don't have representatives that can fight for some of their base needs and infrastructure needs. So is that in the works? Are our allies willing partners in helping in our military investment?
Well, thank you for all of those comments. I was actually just yesterday engaging with General Rupp, Commander of U.S. Forces Japan, and General Skolenka, the Deputy Commander out at Indo-PACOM, on quality of life issues associated with our forces in Japan. It's incredibly important for the Department and the Secretary, and we will continue to do whatever we can to address some of those issues that you described. I have also been encouraged, as you have, by the approach that our allies and partners have taken. You mentioned Taiwan increasing its defense budget. We're very encouraged by that. We've seen Japan set on course to double its defense budget over the next 5 years. The Philippines is also investing in new ways, and the Australians absolutely investing in their own military. And we think that's important for their own contributions to regional security. It increases their ability to contribute to our alliance in new ways as we think about integrating them in roles and missions. And in a number of instances, they are also contributing to infrastructure and supporting our forward presence. So we think that's really important, and I think the role of our allies and partners is key to our success here.
Good. I just ask that we continue to prioritize that as well, in addition to warfighting. And then another question posed to us in Japan was the issue of ship repair. And I represent a district that has a large ship repair industry in Virginia, and that often complains they don't have enough business, and they, it's a lot of factors. We have not enough ships. I wish we had more, but the Japanese want to be more involved. I want to make sure we're repairing ships, as quickly as possible. God forbid there's a conflict, we're going to need to repair ships closer to where the action is. So how can we ensure that we're being protective of our ship repair industry while prioritizing the speed and just capabilities we have in Southeast Asia and being inclusive of Japan?
I'm happy to take that question for the record. I understand there's a lot of factors here, including some of the domestic factors, and getting that balance right about our own domestic industrial capability here associated with ship repair, while also thinking about what contributions our allies and partners can make and what the operational requirements might be, is a really important question. I understand there are conversations underway now between the administration and Congress about some of these issues, and look forward to engaging on them going forward.
Good, thank you. And then they also brought up the issue of cognitive warfare, and we were there during Fukushima when there was some environmental groups and there was some interference from China. They had a lot of bad press. They utilize cyber technology, the media, to be influential to the Japanese people, which right now are overwhelmingly supportive of our alliance and our relationship, the relationship we have with Japan. But just thinking forward, are we cooperating and being supportive of them on that cognitive warfare front as well? And I think it's an important thing that we sometimes overlook, but just wanted to hear how we're prioritizing that too.
Congresswoman, we are throughout the region, including in Japan, and we do. I think what you've described is a really good example of what we see throughout the Indo-Pacific in terms of PRC propaganda and information operations and disinformation. We've seen it around the Fukushima issue. We've seen it throughout Taiwan in a number of ways, in the Philippines as well, in Australia and elsewhere, as the PRC is trying to undermine our alliances and undermine the support for political leaders who want to work with the United States. We're working with these partners in terms of their own cyber capabilities, their own cyber hygiene, as well as our own demands that we do as much as we can to be transparent about the information we have about what the PRC is doing, and we'll continue to be focused on that.